So thank you very much. My name is Johannes Schweifer. I'm actually not an economist, and I'm not new to technology and innovation. So my background is actually a chemist, and as a chemist, I'm used to disruptive innovation, such as blockchain. As one of the early adopters of blockchain technology, I'm co-founder of a company which has become one of the biggest blockchain and Bitcoin brokers in Switzerland. That was in 2013, but I'm not a trader, not at all. I like technology. So together with 4 others, we founded CoreLedger in 2017 and created a technology platform to help people and businesses use this new technology. So the first question which I want to cover is, what are tokens? The nature of tokens can be quickly explained. It is a simple placeholder for a real good. So if you transform a real object into its digital representation, you basically get a claim to the real object. We call that a so-called IOU. And it's essentially a certificate. The one who holds it has a claim against the issuer to get the real object. So tokens can be regarded essentially as digital twins of real assets. You can tokenize anything, commodity, you can tokenize precious metals, you can tokenize fiat currencies such as the dollar, any kind of currency. And of course, also fruits and some exotic stuff. So it's basically true. A token can be a placeholder for anything. So tokens, however, are not new. This concept is fairly old, to be honest. We knew it already in the past. In the past, when people started to use precious metals for money, the so-called monetary metals, gold and silver. But people were always reluctant to carry valuable items with them. There was the danger that they could be stolen. And so somebody had the bright idea to offer a secure and safe storage. These bright people were the predecessors of our today's banks. And of course, if you deposit something of value at some third party, you want some piece of paper, at least something which gives you the right to come back later and claim it. This is storage certificate. And this is not different to what we do with tokens right now at the moment. Then you might be familiar with the rest of the story. These storage certificates, they became so convenient that people used them instead of the gold for settling their claims and purchasing goods. So bankers knew the best idea is to just standardize these certificates, and this is how paper money was born. And we live in a digital world. Digitalizing that paper money transforms it into the money which you have on your bank account. So this concept is not new at all. What is new is the fact that today's tokens live on blockchain. So to know what the advantages are, we have to look on the blockchain itself. What blockchain is really good at? First of all, blockchain has a mechanism which is called bubble spending prevention. This can very easily be explained with forgery prevention. If you have a paper bill for money, you can always make copies. Of course, it depends on your risk appetite and it depends on your skills, but technically it is possible. It's not possible with tokens. You can't make copies. You can't spend them twice. And the reason is that history cannot be altered in that blockchain. You can't pretend that you did not spend it or pretend that you got 2 or 3 or 4 of them, which you can now spend. If you got one, you have one. If you spend it, it's gone. And there is no single party in control of that data because it's globally available and in sync. Everyone has access and can use and replicate that data. Can, but does not have to. Also important is if we look at rules. Also today we have rules. These rules are manifested in contracts, peer-to-peer or multi-party contracts. And you know as well as I do, contracts can sometimes be bent or even broken. Also there, depending on your skills, on your risk appetite, and on lawyers. This cannot happen if the rules are manifested in programs, in computer programs, which live on a blockchain. They are referred to as smart contracts. And a very simple example of such a smart contract is, if I give you token A, then you give me token B. And this is enforced no matter what, and it doesn't need a judge. Lastly, it needs no intermediary for change of ownership. That's a big difference to today's transfer of claims and values. Normally, you need somebody in between. You need a broker, you need somebody in a bank, you need some service. This is not the case for tokens. They can really be transferred from the sender to the receiver, with nobody having to lift a finger in between. Beyond that, there are many more properties, and I don't want to go too much into details. Important is now, if we use such a tool as blockchain to implement tokens and claims, what is the big difference? The big difference is that real goods have some difficulties in the real world. They are mostly difficult to move. Think of large quantities of commodities. It's always a hassle to bring them across borders, and they might require some special storage. Not everyone is qualified to keep diamonds secure and safe. And not everyone might be able to hold them. For example, if it's some chemicals. And lastly, it is very difficult or sometimes impossible to break them into very small pieces. Imagine that the real good is the Mona Lisa. You might run into some hot water if you try to slice a piece out of it. That's not the case when you use tokens, for example. The token is as good as the real item. It can be moved easily and knows absolutely no borders. It can be standardized and requires no special storage, except for something we call a wallet. It can be fractionalized down to an infinitesimal small piece, and it can even be a placeholder for some abstract or exotic value without any real-life analogy. And everyone can hold it. People have already realized that this new technology is kind of big and made very prosperous, but still very defensive estimations how the market will look like. We are looking at a market which has a value of something between 20 and 30 billion within the next 3 to 4 years. And it's just about to grow, especially in times when physical movement is sometimes not possible, like today with COVID. Let us look at some use cases. What can you use these things for? Well, practically for anything. Because if you think about what you can tokenize, the limit is only the imagination. You can tokenize intellectual properties, any kind of services. You can tokenize your work time and use it, for example, as a good for doing exchange, like trading with my neighbor. You can tokenize information and granting access rights to that information. Which information? Well, health data, or how often I do exercises in the morning. It might be a value for somebody. You can tokenize resources. For example, the right to claim some natural resource or to exploit the deposit or to use water in a country. This can be used, for example, to back a loan. And of course, also traditional currencies, again, can be tokenized. Precious metals is a no-brainer, cars, and it can be either the usage right or the ownership right, or anything, like the right to participate in the revenue or profit. So Important is to look at how things developed and how they might develop in the future. Of course, it's super different and difficult to look into the future and predict how it will look like. So let's look in the past. It all started with speculation. There were the public cryptocurrencies at the beginning, Bitcoin and Litecoin and Dash and Monero and all those usual suspects, and people started to speculate on a rise of price. Later, we started seeing the so-called ICOs, initial coin offerings, which were essentially nothing else but a mean to raise funds for startups. They became a little bit more standardized and more financially compliant in the form of security token offerings, STOs, or initial exchange offerings, IEOs. Now, it is very likely that the next wave will be financial products of different kinds, like funds which can be tokenized, or any kind of monetary investment, equity can be tokenized. The blockchain does not forget. This makes it very appealing for storing information, or at least for anchoring information, and always find out whether or not somebody has attempted to change it. So we refer to that as a web of information. And this can be used for tracking and logistics. You want to know where things have been, or where things will go, or should be at a certain moment. Double spending is very important here. In the same way as you can't spend $1 twice, a product can't be at different places at the same time. That's impossible. And the blockchain can absolutely make sure that this is revealed. Any kind of right, such as accessing a certain service or accessing a certain real location, a room, a hotel room, your house, your apartment, this can be tokenized as well. So you can only enter if you have the proper token. That leads us to the concept of smart locks. There have been attempts in the past to realize it, and we will see such implementations in the real world in the next years. Then, of course, everything which works privately or which works in groups will also work from an official standpoint. We will see government currency tokens. China is already working on them, and a couple of other countries as well. There is rumor that they will soon be launched, and we are looking forward to see them. Everything which is related to financial products is always related to compliance. So sooner or later, that compliance has to be routed somehow into those tokens. And that is only possible with digital identities. We already have them at some places right now. Also, the city of Zug has created a first pilot project for making digital identities available to people. So this will just become more widespread. And corporate fundraising on blockchain is the next logical step, which comes a little bit after private fundraising, but nonetheless, once things are institutionalized and standardized, this will come. We will see a web of content where not only the proof and timestamping will be relevant, but also the real data which has been stored, either on blockchain or off-chain, and is being used. Somehow, in some form, be processed by independent machines. All this will finally lead to decentralized banking, where people will peer-to-peer interact with each other. Not without rules, of course, but rules which are imposed on the blockchain directly and cannot be bent. And sooner or later, when all these tokens and mechanisms which have been implemented will run and flux together, then we reach something which we call a web of value. When all those tokens representing their individual values will interact with each other. And this will finally also lead to an interaction of machines and autonomous pieces and parts. Like cars could implement some payment mechanisms for road tolls or something, and everything will in the one or the other way interact. And finally, we will see token economies emerge. Now, one thing is clear. Instead of having to move maybe physically heavy objects, I can move the token much easier and much faster. So transacting them, which means moving them, is much faster with tokens than with real assets. And as tokens are stored values, you can use them to account for and to settle claims. And this essentially is what a token economy is. In a token economy, primarily tokens are used to account for and to settle claims. So finally, this is what you came for. So this is the answer to the token economy question. What's it? This will be it. Using tokens to account for and settle claims. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much for the presentation. Now next, let's start the Q&A session, and we will open the floor to questions. You can type and send us your questions in the Q&A section. You will find it on the left-hand side of the panel. Okay, we have the first question from Nicholas. How long will the presentation take? So the presentation is already finished. Now it's Q&A session, and as scheduled, we will try to finish within 30 minutes. So everybody will be able to go back to their own work. So we have another question now, is where do you see token economy in 2030?
This is like always reading the glass ball. Primarily everywhere where it gives an advantage. So avoiding to have to move heavy objects, that is precious metal, that is commodities maybe. Instead of selling them physically, you sell the claims. As I presented, the backings for loans, like having resources to back a loan, for example, from IMF or World Bank or something. This can be used by entire countries as well as by homeowners or something like this. So there are many different areas. And we can carve out, of course, the financial industry. This is a very predominant sector where the token economy will definitely get and keep hold. We can imagine that it will definitely also be real estate, because there have already been so many attempts to do it and some of them successful. So real estate is, in my opinion, a very likely candidate for being a representative of a token economy. Art could also be one, revenue sharing, a lot of different things.
Okay, talking about real estate, we have another question. What effort do I expect if I want to tokenize a real estate?
Practically speaking, the biggest effort is always the regulatory one. But once this has been overcome, it's about a couple of minutes to actually create the token. So the technical part can be solved very quickly. Clarification of whether or not the respective model is allowed can take up to several weeks or even months, depending on what you want to do. Luckily, there are already some kind of templates, people who have done things before and would either share their knowledge or their lawyers will share their knowledge. So the time for pioneers is almost over now.
Okay, so we have another question now is, in your opinion, what would a bank have to do today to remain relevant in a token economy?
If we're talking about today, then I would suggest that a bank should at least start doing this in some kind of a pilot scope and try to grasp and try to start just playing around with it, because the opportunities, like participating in funding rounds or offering funding rounds for their clients in the form of tokens, or even being the one who orchestrates and initializes security token offering, might be a good business in the future. At least it can start and help to build credibility in that sector. And that is important.
Okay. Okay, another question is, how is a token linked with a real-world asset? Is there an agreement between the token issuer and the token investor? If yes, how can the token investor be sure that the token issuer will be honest and pay, for example, hand out the real-world asset or the proceeds therefore? So do we not still need trust?
Of course, there is still trust needed into the token issuer. So whether or not he has the real good, whether or not he issued more tokens than he has, and so forth. For this purpose, there are, just like today, there are auditors and third parties who could certify it. The difference now is that these certifications, they can be proved by an entry on the blockchain as well. So the decentralized model, which allows tokens to grow and thrive, actually also allows all the surrounding, like the audit mechanism, to be implemented in a decentralized manner. So yes, there's still trust. There's no magic or other mechanism which allows to remove that trust. If you have a token, you have to trust that the one who issued it really has the real good and will serve it and not default. But different to now, where you have monopolies in very many areas, you can have in such a token economy, an environment where the best goods or the best tokens compete with each other. You will have many of the same type. You will have many real estate tokens and many things to choose from, or precious metal tokens. So you as a customer, you can really choose. And this will of course force the issuers to be honest and to prove and make sure everything what they can that their tokenized goods are real.
Okay. We have still quite a few questions, so let's go to the next one. So how future-proof are token standards? Means will a token that's created today will still be valid tomorrow?
Valid, they will be. The question is, will they still be allowed to exist? In theory, yes, because everything which is on the blockchain will stay there. So valid and allowed, nothing can be forbidden which runs on shared protocols and peer-to-peer protocols. So they will exist, but there might be the need to change the standard. So having some kind of dynamic token will definitely be of advantage than having just a static implementation.
Okay. And do you see fractional ownership as part of the future token economies?
Definitely, because there are already now many items which are just too expensive and too big to be purchased and owned as a whole. And fractionalization has been one of the major drivers, for example, to tokenize real estate. And art, pieces of art are normally very expensive. So owning one is a privilege for the rich. Having a fraction of one is possible for every investor. And why not? Also expensive cars or something like this can be shared that way. So fractionalization, if applied correctly, is definitely a case.
Okay. Another question we have here is about regulation. So there are many things that technically possible, but regulatorily forbidden. So how can a token economy emerge with such a constraints?
Practically, there are these constraints and they cannot be undone or wished away. But of course, jurisdiction is not globally enforced. So a blockchain exists in a decentralized manner. Their participants are participants from everywhere in the world. So these constraints, they exist either locally or in very rare cases, yes, they exist globally. Nonetheless, the correct viewpoint is not to see them as constraints or as obstacles, but to cope with them in the correct way. Also, tokens can be made compliant. And this is actually what people should do. Like, think about what is the minimum requirement in order to implement a certain use case and implement these necessary rules into their tokens. So a token economy can only emerge if all players who participate in it behave in a compliant way, in a way which does not create any enemies on both sides or any troubles which interrupt the execution of claims. So regulatory frameworks, they exist, they are there, and they will always be there. And it is always about the implementation of those rules and whether or not they need to be there on a global scope, which will decide the fate of an emerging token economy.
Okay, we have a couple of questions that are very similar, so I will summarize them into one. So in your opinion, which jurisdiction is the best for tokenization project?
That's difficult to answer. Depending on what you want to do, there are some advantages in Switzerland, of course, because Switzerland was one of the first countries to actually allow the public trading of cryptocurrencies and to officially not impose any direct restrictions other than those which exist for other products, like other private currencies. Liechtenstein has a different advantage. As a small country, it will be very positive towards blockchain business models, simply because it is interested in attracting that business. But of course, also Liechtenstein has rules, and it is one of the first countries, if not the first at all, which has created a blockchain law just to end uncertainties and to give safety for blockchain business. Apart from that, there are definitely many countries in which similar rules exist. Estonia, for example, was one of the first countries to use blockchain at all for land registry and company registries and all that. So things are not static. That is important. Conditions change. So in order to choose the right jurisdiction, there is no good advice which I can give. There is only one thing I would advise to look at. It's whether or not a country has a self-interest to be beneficial for blockchain business or not. There are many countries which for many years will not depend on any additional business like blockchain business, and will therefore be kind of reluctant to adopt new and favorable regulations and rules and laws, and others will not. So I hope I answered that question.
Okay, we still have 1 minute for last question. Okay, so someone asked, so money is a matter of trust. It will be similar to tokenization. And how can this social trust arise?
This social trust can just arise in a form of, let's say, evolution of tokens. So this trust will arise not in a certain specific token, which claims to be the best of all. It will arise when people have an advantage using it and see that it is trustworthy, that the issuer is trustworthy. And well, so that's it. The road to accepting something leads over using something, and same as on eBay, getting upvotes and good credibility rating.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for joining us today. Please follow us on social channels at CoreLedger, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session. This whole session will be recorded and uploaded and you can find the video on our YouTube channel, and you will also receive an email with the link. So thanks very much. Please stay updated and see you next session.